If you don't feel safe coming into work, the first thing of all to do is to speak to your HR department, because you could potentially sort it out internally. If that doesn't work, then the next step would be to speak to a local authority or the health and safety executive and report basically that you don't feel like they've put safety measures in place. If you're considered to be vulnerable, particularly if it's something that's considered to be a disability, then you could have a legal case against your employer. And in that respect, you should talk to an employment lawyer. The best thing that an employer can do is be very, very transparent about what is in place and what isn't. I think most people's big concern is just they don't know what the situation will be like when they return to the office. So if they can say, this is the government advice, we have done this, we've done the maximum to protect you, I think that's what they can do. And just keep the team updated. I think when you're working from home, the worst thing is that you just feel quite disconnected and you don't know what's going on. So regular contact, I'd say, is the most important thing. All employers, no matter whether they are kind of company-owned workplaces or workplaces that host a number of different companies, should have done a risk assessment before asking anyone to come in. You have the right to ask for the results of that risk assessment, and you can check whether it matches the government's guidelines on how people can return to work safely. So you can find those on gov.uk, and it's called Working Safely During COVID-19. Trains are a particular problem because they are limiting services. So there's going to be more people essentially on less trains. I would say that you should check what your operator's kind of guidelines is. So I know some are doing seat reservations, so you can check that there are basically limited seats on each train. So there's only going to be a maximum of a certain number of people per carriage. Apart from that, maybe try and speak to your employer about staggering start times, so you're not traveling at rush hour. It just seems impossible to create a booking system for the tube. I mean, it'd be so hard to organise, and I don't even think people would stick to it if they did. I'd say my only advice is, if you can, walk or cycle to work. And if not, maybe ask your employer if you could potentially come in at different times of day. So travel in at 10 a.m. rather than 9 a.m. to avoid peak times. It hasn't been too much of a concern so far because there's been quite limited numbers of people coming back to the office. But as more and more do go back, it's definitely going to be a big concern. I would say definitely wear a mask, and if it's possible, try and keep at least a metre away from someone. If that's still not working and you're finding yourself in cramped lifts, then I would say speak to a HR department, ask if potentially you could start an hour later and leave an hour later so you're not hitting the rush hour. Or the only other thing would be to suggest that they create a system where there's a limited number of people in each lift, so a maximum of 2 or 3. If you still don't feel safe after that, then maybe speak to the health and safety executive again, because that is a concern. So this is a big problem because a lot of people are having to do these negotiations directly with their boss, which can make you feel quite pressurized to agree to things that potentially you don't want to do because you don't want to let the company down or look bad as an employee. So I would say potentially try to find an independent mediator, whether that's someone from your HR department or whether you ask if there's any kind of workplace mental health support. So potentially someone from that could come along. And as a last case resort, potentially just speak to the NHS and see if there's someone, maybe a counsellor, who can come along if you feel very anxious about this and help you make those decisions. Every employee has the right to have flexible working, which means they could either change their start and end times, or they could ask to work from home on a more permanent basis. If you do that, you have to bear in mind that it is a relatively permanent change, and it's quite difficult to then change back. So if you decide that you think for the next few weeks you want to work from home permanently, then if you make that as a legal change in your contract, you would then have quite a lot of difficulty to go back on it. So you should bear that in mind.